Hello friends, welcome to another day of Q&As, joined by my lovely and helpful wife Lucie.
Hi guys.
Lucie will be asking me one of your questions from Instagram, and if you have questions about my answer, please comment in the comment section below and I'll answer your question there.
Alright, the question is by MaxDavid552. Hi Max. Hi Leo, hope all is well with you and Lucie during your move. I've seen that you have dabbled with this topic on your channel, but haven't got fully into it. My question is regarding the health benefits of fish oil, especially what are EPA and DHA? What benefits do they have to the body? What factors do you take into account when deciding how much a person should have of one over the other? How do companies scam people in their production process? And lastly, an explanation of omega-3, 6 and 9 fats will be greatly appreciated. Thank you for all the cutting-edge content you continue to provide on a daily basis. It is so greatly appreciated. Hopefully one day these DM superstars will understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucie. Thank you, Max, for your question. What Max is referring to, by the way, Lucie, is that...
DM superstars.
Yeah, recently I receive a lot of DMs, as you know. And a lot of the people send me very specific questions that are long, very long texts. Even though I only have 1,000 followers or so on Instagram, I receive a lot of questions all the day. And if I answer all of them, not only does it take me a lot of time, but it gets frustrating for me because I think I have consultations that are intentionally priced to be so low that anyone can afford it. Yeah. But they send me this long text and I feel bad telling them, no, I don't answer, book a consultation. So I usually answer. So then I made a rule now. I don't answer DMs from, except it's from clients or a couple of the original people that used to follow the channel from the beginning.
Yeah, it takes too long.
It takes too long, and honestly, it's not respectful. If you know the person has a consultation thing, and you know other people are buying consultations too, and it's cheap to get their answers, why are you sending this long text?
And you're providing a lot of free information on the channel. I'm sure often they probably ask you a question that you already answered on the channel, and they're just too lazy to go through all the videos. Like, let me just ask.
That's the reason why I made that no DM thing. Someone sent me at that minute a question which I talked about in multiple videos. Someone just started following the channel. It's like, I'll go ask him a question. Watch the videos, for God's sake. We spend so much time, Lucie and I both. She sits here with me to give me company and to ask questions. But Max asked a good question, which is, something I've talked about on and off on the channel, fish oil specifically, and fatty acids in general. I never made a video on it because it's sort of basic information and people have talked about it before, but I understand that the viewers who are basically 200 or so viewers that regularly watch our informative videos may want my view of this subject and a detailed treatment on it. So this is a good time to do that. So let's do that, especially for Max. If Max asks, other people have asked, but if Max asks, I will answer because Max is a good guy. So, beginning, first of all, fatty acids. The difference between a saturated fat and an unsaturated fat. So everybody's scared of saturated fats. Saturated fats are solid at room temperature. So if you cook a steak and you leave it on the pan for an hour after, you'll come and find that next to the steak is white, solid
things on your pan.
Exactly. And also you'll find it on the steak if you leave it long enough. Or if you take a steak and then refrigerate the steak, you'll find that it'll even have it on the white, but that's not at room temperature. The point is, a saturated fat is solid at room temperature. Whereas your vegetable oils, if you have a corn oil or a canola oil, you can leave that in the room, it will always stay liquid, right? So that's the difference between a saturated and unsaturated fat. Now, I want to briefly give you guys just an overview of fatty acids in general. I want to describe the nomenclature, how they're described in the literature, so you guys can understand them and access it yourself. This may be a little bit technical. It's going to last about 5 minutes. Just bear with me, it'll be helpful. So basically, fatty acids are described by the number of carbons they have and by the number of double bonds that they have in that carbon molecule. A double bond is a point of unsaturation.
Okay.
So a monounsaturated fat has only one double bond in it. Then they're also described by where that double bond is, according to what's called the nth carbon, which is the last carbon in the molecule. So, for example, an omega-9 fatty acid has a double bond 9 carbons from the last nth carbon. Omega-6 has one of its double bonds 6 from the last carbon. And omega-3 has one of its last double bond, 3 from the last carbon. So that's how that works. Now, how they describe this in the literature is that they have brackets, and the first number in the bracket will be the number of carbons, then they'll have a colon, then they'll have the number of double bonds, then they'll have a colon, and then they'll have n minus a number. Now, in the case of a saturated fat, which has no double bonds, you won't have this other stuff. So, for example, the most common saturated fat, palmitic acid, well, not the most common, but one of the most common, stearic and palmitic are very common. So, let's talk about palmitic acid. Palmitic acid, when you open the brackets, will have 16, the number 16, and 16 carbons in the molecule, then it'll have a colon, then it'll have 0, and close brackets. That's all it has, right? Now, if you talk about, for example, we talk about a monounsaturated fat, oleic acid. Oleic acid, which is an omega 9, if you open the brackets, it will have 18 carbons, then colon, then it'll have 1, then it'll have colon, n minus 9. So it has 1 double bond, the 9th from the last one, and it has 18 carbons in general. Now, talking about omega 6s, the mother of all omega 6s is linoleic acid. Linoleic acid has open brackets 18 colon 2 colon n minus 6. Okay? So that's linoleic acid. Now, the mother of all omega 3 fats is linolenic acid. It's called alpha linolenic acid. The only difference between linoleic and linolenic is an N. So linoleic is for omega 6, linolenic is for omega 3. You open brackets, it has a 20 colon, then it has, again, 2 double bonds. Sorry, not 20, it starts with 18. It has 18, 2 colon, 2 double bonds, then, sorry, not 2, 3 double bonds. So the difference between these, the linoleic and linolenic, is that linoleic, which is the omega 6, has 2 double bonds. Linolenic has 3 double bonds, and the last double bond is n minus 3. Sorry, it was a little bit confusing after talking about too many fatty acids in a row. But the point is, so they, interestingly, so oleic acid, linoleic acid, and linolenic acid, which is 9, 6, and 3, all have 18 carbons. The difference is the position of the double bond and how many double bonds they have.
It's 1, 2, 3.
Exactly. And they're 9, 6, and 3. Exactly. So those are the differences. Now, your body can transform some of these molecules using 2 enzymes. One is called the elongase enzyme, and one is called the desaturase enzyme.
Where is it transformed?
In the liver. Interestingly. So the elongase enzyme, the liver does almost everything in the body. So the elongase enzyme adds carbons to the molecule. The desaturase enzyme adds double bonds to the molecule, making it more points of unsaturation or desaturation in the molecule. So there are some interesting metabolites of these fatty acids, but the rate at which they're metabolized is misunderstood by a lot of people. So, for example, beginning with the omega 6s, linoleic acid, which is an important molecule in the body, and you have to understand this is an essential molecule. If you do not consume linoleic acid, your body cannot produce it. But linoleic acid can be metabolized into a very famous molecule, very notorious molecule called arachidonic acid. How that's done is by adding 2 carbons, so it goes from 18 to 20, and 2 double bonds. So
that goes to 4.
Exactly. So it becomes 24 and minus 6. And that is arachidonic acid. Now, maybe we can talk later about arachidonic acid in more detail. Actually, I'll tell you, so people remember it now. Arachidonic acid is thought to be pro-inflammatory, but it actually has some anti-inflammatory qualities as well, and it is crucial in the body. It is, almost all prostaglandins in the body are composed of arachidonic acid. And without arachidonic acid, the body would have biological problems with it. Now, the amount that arachidonic acid is converted from linoleic acid is not that high. For example, it seems to be, there are some studies that have shown this, you can feed people a lot of linoleic acid, and their arachidonic acid doesn't change much. And this is because the body has a homeostasis. Everyone's biology seems to be a little bit different, and they convert a certain amount. And in general, not much is converted. So it seems to be very much stable. Now, before I go on a little bit further, these are omega 6s, and he wants to know a little bit about their value. Linoleic acid, as I said, is essential. It is beneficial in the body, in a similar way that oleic acid, the omega 9 is. The main reason is because, see, everyone's body, every cell in the body has a cell membrane. Every cell, the heart cell, the neurons in your brains, everything has a cell membrane. This cell membrane is made out of fatty acids. The fatty acids that you eat have an effect on the composition of the fatty acids in your cell membranes.
On all your cells.
All your cells, but not as much as we would think. Again, the body has a homeostasis that depends on your individual genetic makeup and your biology. So, some people can consume, for example, a lot of monounsaturated fats, like a lot of oleic acid, and their cell membrane will start to change a lot. It will have less saturated fats. Some other people can be consuming a lot of it, and they still have a very highly saturated fat cell membrane. If you consume mostly saturated fats, see, this is between people. I'm saying people are different. But within one person, the more you consume saturated fats in your diet, the more you're going to have saturated fats in the cell membrane. Okay? What does that do? That causes the cell membrane to become rigid. Meaning, you have things inside your cell membrane that want to communicate with things outside the cell membrane, but they can't as well because that cell membrane is rigid. So, specifically, polyunsaturated fats and monounsaturated fats make that cell membrane less rigid. So this is the general health, but anyway, that's the aspect. So about oleic acid, monounsaturated fats, or about linoleic acid, as omega-6s, the main value is that they're replacing that saturated fat there. We don't know of any other molecular value they have in the body. We don't know that they do anything else, but we do know that they change that. Now, getting into the interesting topic of omega-3. So, remember, there was linoleic for omega-6. Now you have alpha-linolenic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so alpha, by the way, linon in Greek is flax, like flaxseed. So alpha-linolenic acid, which by the way is found in chia seeds, in flax seeds, in those kind of things that vegans think that they're benefiting a lot from.
I like chia seeds.
Yeah, a lot of people like them because what they think is that, let me tell you why. So alpha-linolenic acid, which is found in those vegetable forms very frequently, or plant matter forms, it is converted again by the same enzymes in the liver, the elongase and desaturase enzymes, into two interesting metabolites. One is called EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, which I'll explain why in a second. The other one is DHA, docosahexaenoic acid.
Well, those come from omega-3 being transformed with enzyme in the liver.
Well, those are omega-3s, but they come from alpha-linolenic acid being converted.
Yeah.
And what happens in the first step? In the first step, 2 carbons are added. So it goes from 18 to 20. Then two double bonds are added.
So it's 5.
It goes to 5, and then it's still N minus 3. And that is eicosa, which is in Greek it's 20, and penta, which is 5, and enoic acid, which means fatty acid. Okay, and then that EPA can then be converted again by the same enzymes. It is added 2 more carbons, so it becomes docosa, 22 in Greek, and then they add 1.
It's 6.
Exactly, 6, which is hexa, and then enoic acid. So that's DHA and EPA. Now, your liver can convert alpha, which is called ALA, by the way. Alpha-linolenic acid is called ALA commonly. It can convert ALA into these 2 metabolites, but the truth is it doesn't do that very much. There are studies that show different numbers. So, some studies show 2 to 10%. Some studies show something in a lower number, like 1% of alpha-linolenic acid converted to DHA and EPA in the body. And by the way, people used to think that, academics talk for like 25 years, that DHA could then be converted back, retro converted to EPA, but turns out it doesn't seem to be the case. But anyway, so studies show that like 2 to 10% in some studies, but some studies as low as 0.6, 0.3% of ALA is converted.
So they don't really know.
Yeah, so vegans will go and eat a lot of flaxseed and they think that they're going to get EPA and DHA. Now the reality is, why do we get this from fish, EPA and DHA? Because EPA and DHA are found mostly in algae. And the algae have EPA and DHA. So the fish eat the algae, and then we get the EPA and DHA from the algae, right? So that's... Now, why are people very interested in EPA and DHA? Well, I'll get into that in a bit. But let me talk a little bit more about cell membranes. So basically, you guys have to understand that your body has cell membranes. The more saturated... You may have... So let me give some specific numbers. On average, Americans have about 4% of their cell membrane from EPA and DHA. Okay, 4%. Some people have had up to 20%. Some people have 16%. Okay, that's a very high number. Most people who supplement with EPA and DHA end up somewhere around 7 to 12%. The people think that 8 to 12% is ideal. Some people in the US have as low as 2% EPA and DHA. Now, the average American consumes about 150 grams of EPA and DHA unless they supplement directly with it. Okay. So even people who eat fish, 150 milligrams. So not grams, milligrams. With those people, keep in mind, how many grams of fat do people eat? Hundreds sometimes. A lot of grams of fat.
It's mostly saturated fat.
Mostly saturated fat. Well, some monounsaturated, some other ones, but I'm talking about EPA and DHA specifically. We're going to get into why specifically. Let's talk about it now, in fact. So why are people interested in EPA and DHA? Well, I have to give you a little bit of history. So what was recognized, maybe in the 70s or 60s, was that, well, by that time, people had realized that saturated fat seems to be correlated to heart disease. They didn't understand the mechanisms why, but they seemed to think that the more people eat saturated fat, the more heart disease they got. So there was a
That's how it started, the non-fat diet thing.
Exactly. Which unfortunately then they started eating a lot of sugar, which caused a lot of other problems. But what they did notice was this, and their studies showed this. If you replace saturated fat in a diet with vegetable oil, which is unsaturated, right? Which now people are scared of vegetable oil. But if you replace it with vegetable oil, their cholesterol, total cholesterol, would go down. Always. So that was consistently shown. Now what was interesting is that basically the interest in fish oil began with a paper by Dyer-Berg in the late 1970s. And by 1985, there was a bunch of papers. In fact, I think it was the New England Journal of Medicine had 3 papers in one issue back to back on fish oil that really shocked the world, and people started getting really excited about fish oil. Now, Dyer-Berg's paper was about the Inuit, which were called Eskimos back then. Now, then they were called Eskimos. Now they're called Inuit. I'm not sure why they're offended by, I don't know, maybe their name for themselves is Inuit. So I don't know anything about them really too much, but I do have an article on my blog about the Inuit, which describes this subject I'm talking about right now. So originally, Dyer-Berg and these people came across these Inuit people, and these Inuit people don't eat plants. They're living in, Arctic sort of regions. So all they were able to eat was basically fat and some meat, mostly fat. Most of their diet was saturated fat, whale blubber and all kinds of, a lot of fat. But they didn't seem to get heart disease. They thought that. Turns out not to be true. And that's what my article is about. One of my early blog posts is about this topic. They actually don't have better cardiovascular health that much. They have a lot of aneurysms. There's no evidence of this. People thought that they didn't get atherosclerosis. But actually there's a post-mortem analysis of a bunch of Inuits even from those times that show advanced atherosclerosis. But at that time, the important thing is people thought, these guys are eating a lot of saturated fat, but they're not getting heart disease. And for some reason they thought they don't have atherosclerosis. So what is the reason? And they noticed these people eating a lot of fish. In fact, the Inuit at that time were eating about 6 to 7 grams of fish oil a day, of EPA and DHA. Okay, yeah. Not of fish oil, of EPA and DHA. So that's a lot, okay? The average American, remember, taking 150 milligrams. Milligrams. So this is a huge difference. So they thought it must be the fish oil. So they started with a study. In fact, I'm forgetting the author's name. His first name is William. I'll probably cite him here. But they came up with a study originally that actually, what it did was it replaced the saturated fat completely in the human diet. It was a metabolic ward study, which means you change people's diet completely and study them in detail. These are the best kind of nutrition studies. And they removed the saturated fat completely, made them eat fish, and made them actually drink fish oil. Tons of it. I don't even remember how much they were getting, but grams and grams and grams and grams. What happened was interesting. Their total cholesterol reduced, just like with the vegetable oil, but their triglycerides reduced also, which is the fats in the blood. Triglycerides, when you check your lipids, your LDL cholesterol, your HDL, you also see your triglycerides. So this was the first time this had ever been seen. They had never seen triglycerides lowered by anything at that point. So they were very surprised by any nutritional supplement. So that initial study caused this huge growth, and then there were a lot of papers saying that fish oil reduces cholesterol and it reduces triglycerides. So fish oil became a heart-healthy oil and something that people need to take, because even though alpha-linolenic acid is what is essential, it doesn't get converted that much, what they realized, and they need to supplement EPA and DHA to get this total cholesterol lowering element and the triglyceride lowering element. But this turned out also not to be completely true. Later studies showed that if they didn't replace all the saturated fat in the diet, and if they actually, because by the time supplements came out, they did studies with supplements. And when they supplemented the people with a high amount of fish oil, they actually found that cholesterol didn't go down. Triglycerides went down, but cholesterol sometimes went up. Specifically, HDL went up, and LDL went up as well, low density lipoprotein particles. Not just
people were still consuming saturated fat.
No, it turns out to be see, the reduction in saturated fat was lowering the cholesterol. And what was actually raising the cholesterol was the DHA in the fish oil, specifically the DHA. It seems to be that in people with usually higher triglycerides, very large doses of DHA can raise not only HDL, but LDL particle count and LDL particle size.
Oh wow.
So size is a good thing that it's raising, but the count is raising also. So the LDL-C, the LDL cholesterol parameter that you guys could get in your blood work was higher. And so this was unfortunate, because in the supplement industry, the fish oil guys were claiming on the bottle cholesterol lowering. They had to remove this, and it was a whole thing. But still, it lowered triglycerides, which was interesting. So now I give you I don't know how to structure this, because there's a lot to talk about with fish oil. Let's talk about the benefits now. What we know about fish oil. So we know that. I'm thinking of how to structure this. We know that EPA and DHA, both of them, first of all, they both make cell membranes more flexible, more than anything else. Okay, so they make cell membranes more flexible, and so in that way they have an effect on a lot of biological functions. They affect gene transcription. Like 1,040 genes get affected, transcribed when you consume EPA and DHA, because there's a lot of change in the biology. For example, with the LDL receptor. So your LDL receptor pulls out LDL from the blood. If your cell membrane is more flexible, the LDL receptor can potentially pull out more LDL particles from the blood. The weird thing is when you take DHA, even though DHA seems to make it more flexible, it seems to make the LDL receptor less efficient. So the way it's raising the LDL count does not seem to be by producing more LDL, but by pulling out less. Anyway, they have other values too. So, for example, EPA is known as a protectant, known as a resolvent molecule, which means it resolves inflammation, resolves inflammatory cytokines and things in the body. So it lowers. Fish oil in general, they lower tumor necrosis factor alpha, IL-1 beta, all of these inflammatory cytokines that we talk so much about on the channel. Now, DHA also does a similar thing, but what it's called is a protectant. It protects the body a little bit from inflammatory cytokines. EPA, generally both of them do this, but EPA in particular lowers heart rates and increases heart rate variability, which is a good thing. So you judge the heart health by the amount that it can go up and down, how far the range is. So it does that as well. What else do they do? Like I said, they change gene transcription. They have value on depression. Interestingly, so this is another mistake people misunderstand. So people think that the brain has the brain does have a lot of DHA. 20 to 30% of the lipids in the brain are DHA. So because the brain has a lot of DHA, people thought DHA must be particularly important for the brain. This may be true, but it's not. That logic does not make sense. So we do have evidence, for example, that especially for pregnancy, when mothers consume higher amounts of DHA, number one, they have less early deliveries. They have higher birth weights of the children. The children have better hand-eye coordination. The children have a better problem-solving skills when they're a bit older. Better hand-eye coordination when they're very young. They have less inflammatory diseases, less asthma, less eczema, skin, autoimmune disease, and some other stuff as well. So there's a lot of benefits for children, it seems. But Studies on adults, for example, on depression, they give them DHA, they haven't panned out, doesn't affect depression. EPA, on the other hand, which remember has that resolvent aspect to inflammatory cytokines, does seem to reduce depression. Sorry guys, our camera just shut because of battery issues. We need to figure this thing out. Anyway, what was I talking about last? Oh yeah, the depression stuff. So basically, even though there's a lot of DHA in the brain and it seems to affect pregnancy and all this stuff, the depression studies have shown that DHA supplementation has not lowered depressive markers in people, but EPA has. It seems to be because of these resolvent molecules that affect inflammation. As I've mentioned before on the channel, inflammatory cytokines directly cause depression, and they're a result of depression as well.
Nice.
Now, also there's a little bit about the brain just briefly. Alzheimer's disease patients have lower levels of EPA and DHA on average. And it seems to be, for example, there are rodent studies in which DHA supplementation reduces amyloid plaque development in the brain by about 40%. So but this is rodent studies, so it may have an effect there. There is some scant research evidence showing that improvement in insulin sensitivity as well for people, so it could potentially be helpful for the metabolic syndrome. But generally, the health effects of fish oil are about the cell membranes, gene transcription, and triglycerides.
So,
and there may be an effect on the brain, but
except the raising
and inflammation.
Except the raising of the LDL, is there other like bad or side effects or bad things?
No, that's the main side effect. Well, let me mention something. That is the main side effect, but there are people on YouTube who annoy me that make videos saying that polyunsaturated fats, including EPA and DHA, are dangerous. Why do they say they're dangerous? Because they say that those molecules are less stable in the body and they're more likely to be transformed into... Basically, they think that these molecules can become dangerous, and saturated fats are more stable molecules. They can't be transformed as much and changed into something that can be dangerous. The reason why this seems laughable to me is because this is really conjecture. This is really saying like, it's biologically true that this is possible, but we have no evidence of it. It's not like people who have taken... It's been long enough now. People have been taking a lot of polyunsaturated fats. People have been using vegetable oils in high amounts. But this mostly regards vegetable oils. Fish oil is taken in lower doses, so they don't care as much about that. But those people will still warn you. Don't take over a gram of fish oil, or don't take over 300 milligrams. You don't need that for your body. But what we're trying to do is maximize the amount of polyunsaturated fat in that cell membrane so that the cell membrane is more fluid. They think that this is going to make it more dangerous in our body because these polyunsaturated fats can be turned into basically dangerous molecules that can harm cellular function and stuff like that. All conjecture. I think the reason why they do this is because when you're in, especially in nutrition, you want to distinguish yourself. Everybody's talking about the same stuff. So you have to come up with something that is unique. So, so you have to, and the best way to make yourself known in this world of nutrition is to say something contrarian.
Yeah, or create some crazy diet. Like diet.
Crazy diet, but that usually doesn't work for the legitimate nutritionists. That works for like people, I don't want to name names, but ridiculous people. But for the people who have PhDs in nutrition, which is a ridiculous subject to do a PhD in, but people who have those PhDs, to distinguish themselves, they want to do something contrarian and they want to stand out a little bit. And it's hard to stand out because, those people, they don't read interesting things. They don't have new ideas. They don't talk about like we do, we talked about EPO last week. This week we talk about injectable choline. They don't have interesting ideas. So they want to separate themselves in some kind of way. And so they come up with, this is my belief. This is just my belief. But there's no way they can prove what they're saying. There is no observational or experimental studies to show that what they're saying is true. That there is a net negative outcome of eating polyunsaturated fats. What they say is molecularly it's possible that these polyunsaturated... Anyway, so I won't get into too much detail there. The point is, reduction of inflammation is what we see. I'm repeating myself again, but just so you guys know, reduction of inflammation, reduction in triglycerides, potentially impacts on the brain, changes in gene transcription. Those are the main things that... Now, there are some interesting... So, I want you guys to know, now let's talk about the actual form... let's talk about prescription forms of fish oil, and then let's talk about supplemental forms. There are prescription forms. The first one that was well known is called Lovesa. It had 85% EPA and 15% DHA. It's still available now. It was studied in a study with, I think, people that were already taking statins, but I'm not completely sure. See, this is one problem with this subject. It's hard to study the effect of fish oil on outcomes of cardiovascular events because, like all other things in cardiovascular disease, it's unethical to take people that have cardiovascular disease and not give them statins because statins work so well.
Yeah.
If you don't give it to them, you're making them live shorter lives, for sure. So and statins are so powerful that when you do these studies, the person's already taking statins and you add a little bit, something weak to it, you don't see the difference statistically, it's not visible. And especially in outcomes. You're trying to see outcome evidence. You can lower LDL, you can lower other things, but see a difference in heart attacks, it's hard to tell with a statin there. Nonetheless, Lovasa got approved by the FDA because it did show an impact. It had 85% EPA, 15% DHA. Why does it have less DHA? Because the DHA seems to be potentially raising the LDL. So this is why they're doing that. It was approved, studied in about 4,000 patients or so, had good impacts, and that was that. The interesting thing is when that was happening, the Japanese had their own side to this. The Japanese were thinking that EPA in particular is the most important thing, so they were producing pharmaceutical versions. I forgot the name of their brand. I think maybe it's called Epadil or something like that, with only EPA. Now, a company in the US recently, actually it's not, I don't think it's an American company, but recently in the US they produced an EPA version, only EPA, fish oil prescription, called Vascepa, which I have a prescription for. Now, Vascepa is 100% EPA. By the way, both the Lovasa and Vascepa are 1 gram capsules.
Nice.
That's one of the advantages of them over other products. Most other products, the maximum you find is 500 milligrams in one tablet, not capsule. These are 1 gram, so it's easier to take a lot. By the way, both of them, the guidelines are to take 4 grams a day.
Oh.
So it's quite a bit. Remember, the American is taking 150 milligrams. So 4 grams a day. Anyway, the Vascepa was studied in a very interesting trial called Reduce It. It's actually an acronym. A lot of these trials are acronyms that sound cool. So it's capital letters, reduce hyphen it. The Reduce It trial had, I believe, 8,000 people in it. To qualify for this trial, you had to have high triglycerides, between 200 and 500. But but you had to be on statins and have LDL under control. So the LDL was around 70 in these people. These people had to have a history of either cardiac events or like type 2 diabetes, some other factor. They studied them, I think, for a period of 4 to 5 years. They showed that Vascepa reduced cardiac events by 25%.
Wow.
And reduced and with a small reduction in triglycerides, which is very interesting because it showed that the reduction in the triglycerides was not the causal factor of the EPA reducing cardiac events. So this showed that EPA can reduce heart attacks in people at risk even on statins. They were all on statins, 8,000 people, and it's still 25%. They were taking 4 grams,
4 grams.
And only EPA. So this had a huge impact. So then it showed really solidified, showed that this affects actual outcomes, heart attacks, even if you're taking mega strong statins. These are not the statin that I take sometimes, Livalo. These are the big statins. And people that already have 70 LDL cholesterol, so amazing cholesterol. So anyway, this is basically the background there. And those are the 2 prescription options, Lovasa or Vascepa. Now, both of them are actually ethyl ester versions. Now, I'll talk about the supplements now, and he asked how do people trick people in the supplements, stuff like that. And this is basically the issue. And this, again, comes a bit of controversy with the people on YouTube. So, specifically, this is going to be a little bit controversy with Rhonda Patrick. So this is how they are developed. So, what happens is the fish oils are taken from fish. The actual fish oil only has about 30% EPA and DHA. It has other kinds of fats in it. So to make the supplemental version, they use I forgot what molecular distilling. They have to basically purify the fish oil from the other fatty acids, get rid of mercury, get rid of some other things, and in the process, originally the fish oil is in what's called triglyceride form, which means it has 3 fatty acids with a glycerol backbone. They take this glycerol backbone and replace it with an ethanol backbone. That's what's called, so that's triglyceride form or ethyl ester form.
Okay.
So that with the ethanol backbone, they finish purifying it, and most supplement companies then just sell you that, which is the same for Lovasa and Vascepa. They sell you that. Some supplement companies will then remove the ethanol backbone and add back the glycerol backbone to sell it to you in triglyceride form. Why do they do that? Because triglyceride form is better absorbed by the body. It basically has a higher absorption rate. So you'll get more EPA in your red blood cell membrane, which, by the way, there's a test called Omega Quant by one of the leading researchers on this subject, William something. It's the same guy that I mentioned, he has papers earlier. Omega Quant will test for you how much EPA and DHA you have in your red blood cell membrane. Although all your cell membranes in the body have the fatty acids, the red blood cell membrane is easily accessible through your blood, and it seems to correlate very well with the heart membranes, with the muscle membranes, with the intestine membranes, with the liver membranes, but not with the brain membranes. So the brain is a little bit different. But anyway, so if you take a triglyceride form, you'll end up with more, for example, EPA in your red blood cell membrane than if you take an ethyl ester form.
Okay.
So that's, and how much, by a significant amount. But it'll also be more expensive. The triglyceride form one, they have to re-put it in triglyceride form, will always be more expensive. Now, Rhonda Patrick popularized this krill oil. Krill is something like a shrimp kind of thing. She popularized it, and people have told me, this is why I'm talking about this, because people have commented on my Instagram, other places, that krill oil is super. You should use krill oil. Krill oil does not have triglyceride form or ethyl ester form. It is phospholipid form. Phospholipid form is absorbed like 60%. Like if you take 100%, so if you take 10 grams of triglyceride form, you can get the same amount from 6 grams of krill oil because of EPA in krill oil, because of the phospholipid form. What they don't tell you, the very obvious thing, is krill oil is very expensive and has very little EPA in it. You're not going to get grams without spending thousands of dollars. It's a lot of money. So it doesn't really matter. Even if it has a higher absorption rate, even if 60% compared to
less EPA, it doesn't matter.
Much less. You're not talking about a little bit less. It's so much less EPA. Sure, it's absorbed a little bit more, but we're talking about orders of magnitude difference. You can't afford that. Then they say, no, it may be transported into the brain a little bit easier. Maybe, but you have so much less, so it doesn't really matter anyway. And then the other thing about it is they say, oh, it has this damn antioxidant. Jerry Brainham mentioned this to me in the first Jerry Brainham interview. We're doing another Jerry Brainham discussion soon. Jerry Brainham, I really respect, and he's a wonderful guy. He likes this antioxidant called astaxanthin, something like that. I don't know how to pronounce words that have an X in the middle of it. What is X? Why don't they use K and S? It makes more sense. Anyway, astaxanthin, something like that. This is what gives flamingos their pink color, shrimp their pink color. So this is an antioxidant. It certainly is an antioxidant, but how much it's studied is very little. I have tried my best because I've thought of taking it before. In fact, I have it, and I have taken it many times, but there's no evidence to take it. There's like 3 studies showing barely anything in animals, barely any evidence. Before you take this, you take hundreds of other antioxidants. So they say, oh, that is in krill oil. So it has that, and it crosses across the blood-brain. This is all just marketing. People want to distinguish themselves. They want to say, oh, I have something new that you've never seen before. So that's why they bring this krill oil. Oh, this is special. It gets absorbed way better. Well, if I'm taking 1/10 the amount, what does it matter, right? And it's still costing me more, even to take 1/10, right? So that doesn't, in my opinion, guys, krill oil is BS. Just ignore that. It's a waste of your time. What you should be doing, well, let's get into what you should be doing. So we talked about everything now, basically. We talked about the way the supplements found. We talked about the pharmaceuticals, which are ethyl ester. Even the pharmaceutical companies are not putting it even in triglyceride form. And we talked about the health value of these things. We talked about their history. And so what does this leave us with now? He asked me a specific question. How do you decide how much DHA and EPA someone should have? Ideally, you want to have 12% or more, in my opinion, of the fatty acids in your red blood cell membrane be from EPA and DHA. Now, some people convert more EPA into DHA than other people. So
how can you do that?
By checking and Max knows this well, by checking your red blood cell membrane, then, for example, you only take EPA, you check the red blood cell membrane. It takes about 4 months for your red blood cell to regenerate, and you have new red blood cells. And 4 months later, you check it again. Okay, now you know how much EPA affected you, and you know your DHA. Now you add in you know how much you converted. Then you add in DHA, you see how much it gets affected. Then you decide what you want to do. You want DHA in there, you want EPA in there, but the problem is this. The reason why sometimes I have clients, I advise them not to take DHA directly is because DHA will raise their LDL particle count in a lot of people. So if you can avoid taking DHA and just take EPA, you get no risk. Basically, EPA doesn't have risk. DHA has some risk. Now, does that risk outweigh the benefits? I don't think so. It's still maybe, even if it raises your LDL and HDL, it still may be fine because there's so many other benefits. In my opinion, I would rather take a tiny amount of a statin, like a Livalo, tiny, like 0.5 of a gram of Livalo a day, and take as much DHA as I want, because DHA is very beneficial. So when you take these things, as you guys have heard from the Vascepa and the Lovasa, or whatever it's called, the 2 pharmaceutical trials, they're using 4 grams a day. That's where the benefits come. For you guys that are taking 150 or 300 milligrams a day or whatever, that's for the essential amount, just to make sure you have an essential amount. But again, it's the alpha-linoleic that's essential. The ALA, not the EPA and DHA, because you can convert them technically. They're not essential. But so I don't even want those people, nutritional people that say, oh, it's dangerous, just take 200 to get the essential. It's not essential anyway. So you're using this as a drug. If you want to use this as a drug, you need grams of it. The problem is it's costly. So if you want to be cheaper, the most cost-effective way is to get the ethyl ester form and to get as much of it as you can afford. So there's, I think, you guys can ask me, but you could go on Amazon. You'll find there are only a couple of brands that have only EPA, ethyl ester. Well, there's no triglyceride. So if you want EPA, you have to use ethyl ester anyway. But you'll find a couple of brands only. They have usually 500 milligrams in a tablet. You can take a bunch of those. And there's, I think, one brand that has only DHA. But generally what I do is I take a bunch of EPA and then I take a triglyceride form of EPA and DHA in one pill. And then so I try to get between 4 and 6 grams a day of the total. Now, if you're stingy, this is going to be hard for you because it's very costly. This is, other than probiotics, this is the most costly supplement I take. So it really affects you. Anyway, it has a huge impact on your inflammation levels. It will lower your triglycerides. It impacts the biology of your body, your gene transcription. It's all worth doing. And I hope this video was helpful for you guys. I tried to explain it really from the top to the bottom. You know about linoleic acid, you know about oleic. Oleic is the 9. You know about linoleic, which is the 6. You know about alpha-linolenic, which is the 3. You know about arachidonic acid, which I didn't go into too much detail, but the arachidonic acid basically became notorious because like 3 or so researchers were popularizing this idea that it's very dangerous, pro-inflammatory, and so on. It is necessary in the body, but the thing is it doesn't change much. If you consume linoleic acid a lot, it won't change much in your body anyway, so it's not really something to be too worried about. Oh, one thing I didn't mention at the end. So I gave you an overview of everything. The last thing I want to mention is, what is this thing about ratios? So originally there was a ratio called the P to S ratio, which is the polyunsaturated fat to the saturated fat ratio. Now that ratio makes a little bit of sense because you're really trying to look at the red blood cell membrane and see how much saturated fat there is there. That makes sense. The problem with the ratios, generally, is that they don't account for how much you have. They just account for the ratio. So that's one problem. Now, then later what came out is the omega 3 to 6 ratio. Now, this makes sense in only one way. The omega 3s and 6s compete for the same desaturase and elongase enzymes in the liver. So that means that when your liver, if it's converting, it converts very little of the linoleic acid to arachidonic, and very little of the, and there's also another metabolite that we don't really understand, the after arachidonic, but it also converts the ALA into EPA and DHA. They're competing for the same enzyme pool. So technically, if you have more omega-6, you may have less ability to convert. Does that really matter, since you're only converting really like, the average of the studies is like 2%? Does it really matter? No, it doesn't really matter. So what is it about the ratio then? Well, we know omega-6 is still lower cholesterol compared to saturated fat. When you replace saturated fat in that diet with omega-6s, it lowers cholesterol. So, is omega-6 bad for you? And then the other thing was the arachidonic acid. People would think, oh, it turns into, but it doesn't convert that much to arachidonic acid, linoleic acid. So omega-6 is not bad for you, right? Omega-9 is not bad for you either. They're not bad for you. There's no reason to have a ratio. It's the omega-3 that you want. And in particular, it's not omega... So we do know that ALA has some health benefits, but we don't really know why. We don't know molecularly what it's doing exactly. It has some... It's been shown people who eat more ALA in general have better cardiovascular health, but not much is converted to EPA and DHA. What we know about is the EPA and DHA. That is the goal. That is what you guys want. So that's the end of my talk. I gotta shut up now. I've been talking too long, but I hope you guys have been asking for this video. This is a detailed video. If you have questions, ask down below. And I don't think you can have, because I talked about everything, but this is everything. So wish you a great day, and thank you for watching. See you later.